tonight's mystery draws you into secrets that should have stayed buried, and a truth that refuses to stay hidden. Settle in, detective. The case begins now. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the letter Archie wasn't meant to read. By the time I reached our front steps, the wind had decided to turn my overcoat into a sail and my patience into confetti. I fought my way up the stoop with the kind of determination a man reserves for survival or for retrieving a sandwich he left on the counter. Manhattan was taking a personal interest in drowning itself that night. The rain lashed West 35th Street as though avenging some forgotten insult. The streetlights sputtered, taxis hissed by with their wipers flailing like frantic semaphore, and I, brilliant, loyal and underpaid, just wanted to get inside before pneumonia developed an affection for me. The first sign of trouble lay halfway under the brownstone door. It wasn't a snake, a warrant, or a screaming relative of a former client. It was an envelope, cheap paper, cheap ink, but the kind of cheap that tries hard to look respectable, a bit like a man wearing a rented tuxedo to his own wedding. On the front, scrawled in the nervous handwriting of someone unused to confidence, were the words, "Private, to be opened only by N. Wolfe." You might wonder what sort of man picks up a private letter addressed to his boss and reads it. You might also wonder why bears prefer woods. Curiosity isn't a habit with me, it's a congenital condition. I bent, picked it up, and stepped inside before the weather rearranged my face. The foyer was warm, dim, and blessedly dry. I closed the door, shrugged off the coat, and considered the envelope like it was a riddle wrapped in a bad decision. The seal was already cracked. Not by me. Or so I told myself. The truth was, a broken seal is an invitation, and I'm a man who doesn't like to disappoint invitations. I slid a thumb under the flap. Inside was a single sheet, typed unevenly, with one line at the top that grabbed me by the collar. He knows what I did with the ledger. I read only that before guilt elbowed its way in and told me to stop. For once, I listened. I tucked the rest of the message back in and headed for Wolfe's office, practicing the kind of innocent expression that has never fooled him once. Wolfe was in his chair, broad as a baron, and twice as opinionated. The storm rattled the windows, but he sat unmoved, sipping a single chilled beer with the serenity of a man who had tamed the universe into working around his timetable. Orchid hours were long over. His cheek still held the faint glow that came from successful horticultural confrontations. "You're late," he said without looking at me. "So's spring," I answered. "If it shows up earlier next year, I'll match its enthusiasm." He didn't sigh, which meant he was withholding judgment. He extended a hand, palm up, without shifting his gaze from the window. "The mail." That was Wolfe speak, for I know you saw something. If he'd asked how my evening was, I'd have checked his pulse. I placed the envelope into his hand. "Front door delivery. Looks like someone missed the postal cut." He noted the crack in the seal. Then he noted me. Wolfe could observe a man's soul by watching how he inhaled. "You read it." I cleared my throat. "Only the first line," which was one line too many. "Pfui," he murmured. Not dismissal, not anger, but something closer to resigned annoyance wrapped in fond irritation. "Your restraint is marginally creditable." He unfolded the letter. His eyes moved once down the page. His shoulders stiffened, not with surprise, but calculation. The room went quiet. Wolfe's silences could stop traffic. "This," he said at last, "is a plea for help." "From who?" I asked. "Elias Prentice." He set the letter on his desk blotter as if it might melt the leather. "An accountant at Atherton and Clay Imports. Their reputation for laundering transactions is whispered among the less savoury corridors of commerce." "A bookkeeper working for bootleg shippers," I said. "That sounds stable." "Do not limit your ignorance by speaking it," Wolfe replied. He gestured for the dictionary-sized bottle of beer on his tray. I handed it over. He sipped, contemplating the words. Outside, thunder rolled across Manhattan like a bowling ball in a cathedral. "He says he is in danger," Wolfe continued. "He requests my counsel. He wishes an appointment." "Well," I said, "he's polite. Murderers rarely schedule in advance." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Arrange for him at 11 in the morning, after orchids." "Of course," I said. "Heaven forbid your client's blood be shed during the sacred horticultural rites." "Archie." "Yes?" "Resist the impulse to be insufferable." I'll put in the paperwork. He gave me a look, one of those dry, weighty glances that suggested he expected civilization to crumble any moment under the burden of my personality. But he let it go. Beneath all that formality was a thread of protectiveness he'd deny under oath. I moved to my desk, typed a note to myself, and filed the letter in Wolfe's drawer. Thunder flared again. I wondered what kind of man sends panicked pleas to detectives during storms. My red herring of the evening was that Prentice was probably just scared of auditors, an idea even I didn't believe. I didn't sleep much. Rain kept tapping on my window like an impatient drummer. At about 4 a.m, I padded down to the foyer for a glass of milk, my first and allowable ration of the story. When I opened the door to check the weather, something slid inward. Another envelope. Same trembling handwriting, same cheap paper, same desperation oozing through every fibre. But this one was addressed to Archie Goodwin. For a moment, I considered opening it. That moment lasted exactly as long as it took my conscience to trip over its own shoelaces. I pocketed it, unread. Sometimes I surprise even myself. By 9 a.m, Wolfe was planted in the office like a deity waiting for worshippers. Theodore Horstman had delivered his orchid report. Fritz was arranging dishes in the kitchen. The world was ready for business. At 9:15 the phone rang. I answered. "Goodwin," came Kramer's voice, gruff, clipped, exhausted. No fire, no fury, just the tone of a man staring down another sunrise without sleep. "Put Wolfe on." Wolfe extended a hand for the receiver. The gesture was courtly, as though bestowing communion. "This is Wolfe," he said. Kramer didn't bother with greetings. "Your client won't be making that appointment." A long pause. "We found Elias Prentice dead in his office chair this morning." Wolfe shut his eyes, just briefly, as though absorbing the weight of inevitability. Then he opened them and spoke with perfect calm. "Inspector," he said, "I trust you will come presently." "I'm already on my way," Kramer replied, and the line went dead. Wolfe set the phone down with a softness that made the message louder. He didn't look at me, but his voice had a low, firm gravity that told me exactly what he was thinking. "Archie," he said quietly, "this is now our affair." Which was Wolfe speak for, "Prepare yourself. We're stepping into the storm." I've seen dreary offices in my time, but none that looked quite as determined to give up the ghost as the one Elias Prentice occupied on the morning he stopped occupying anything at all. The building squatted between 2 wholesale perfume warehouses on a narrow midtown block where the sun never got a fair shake. The sidewalk smelled like a turf war between cloves, old ink, and despair. Above the entrance, a crooked metal sign announced Atherton and Clay Imports, though from the looks of it, they imported mainly mildew and excuses. I pushed through the glass door at 9:42 a.m., my shoes dragging streaks of wet city misery across the floor. The air inside hit me like the forgotten trunk of an Atlantic liner. Salt, dust, stale coffee, and something sweet that coated the tongue unpleasantly. Pearlie Stebbins stood by the doorway to the main office, arms planted like twin telephone poles, jaw jutting out in its usual "don't try me" formation. He grunted as I approached. That's Pearlie's preferred method of communication. Vowels are a special occasion. "About time," he said. "For what?" I asked. "A guided tour of mildew culture?" He jerked his thumb toward the inner office. "Kramer's in there with the stiff." I stepped past him. The inner office was small enough that 2 people breathing would fog the place. Inspector Kramer stood with his back to me, cigar unlit between his fingers. Never a good sign. When he turned, his expression held the tight, sandpapered quality of a man who's had enough surprises for 1 quarter, much less 1 morning. "Goodwin," he said. "Wolfe send you?" I offered a shrug. He was tied up with orchids, but yes. His mouth twitched around something that wasn't quite irritation or amusement. "He got a letter, advance notice." "Technically," I said, "it was delivered by storm. Weather's a lousy receptionist." He grunted, not entirely disapproving, and gestured toward the desk. "There he is." Elias Prentice was slumped peacefully in his chair, as if he'd drifted off during a bedtime story. His thin frame wore a dull grey suit that had been pressed sometime in the Roosevelt administration. His hair, sandy and thinning, had fallen slightly over his forehead. His eyes were closed. If I hadn't known better, I would have asked who tucked him in. But even a glance told the truth. The stillness was too absolute. The air around him held the faint metallic quiet that comes from death barging in without knocking. I approached the desk, careful not to touch anything. Kramer watched me like a teacher with a ruler. The desktop was a cluttered battlefield of account books, pencils, stamps, and shipping manifests. But one thing caught my eye immediately. A torn photograph. Half a face, a woman's, and behind her, a stretch of harbour skyline with cranes like steel praying mantises. Red herring of the day. Maybe Elias had died of heartbreak. The idea was about as reasonable as Wolfe taking up tap dancing, but you never know where a weak clue might lead you before it collapses. Kramer followed my gaze. We found the other half? No, he said. Room was like this when we arrived. Except for, he leaned in. Look at that. Near Prentice's limp hand was a cloth scrap. A faint trace of perfume lingered on it, the same aggressive floral scent that had clung to the sidewalk. I didn't need Wolfe's vocabulary to interpret that. Someone had stood close to Prentice. Too close before he died. I glanced around the room. A shipping crate in the corner sat half open, its straw packing spilling onto the floor. Empty. Something had been inside once. Something someone wanted quickly. Where are the ledgers? I asked. Kramer pointed to a shelf. 3 thick books. 1 gap. A missing volume. All right, I said. Someone lifted the ledger he mentioned in the letter. Kramer raised a brow. Wolfe already told you what was in the letter. Some of it, I said. You tell him I want the rest. You tell him that, I replied, and you'll get the full vocabulary lesson. He didn't argue. For a man who enjoyed bluster, Kramer had a keen instinct for futility. At 10:08, the first of the supporting cast arrived. A woman in a navy skirt suit, dark hair pinned sharply, lips painted with the precision of a bookkeeper checking columns. Her perfume clung to the air like a crime. Gloria Vale, she said, offering a hand that trembled just enough to be noticed. I worked with Elias. I can't believe... Her voice cracked. Kramer stepped in. Miss Vale, you knew him well. Well enough, she said. He kept to himself. He wasn't the type to... She paused. He wasn't the type, Stebbins snorted. Type doesn't matter when bullets do. No bullets, Kramer said. Looks like poison. Gloria paled further. Then he arrived. Martin Kessler, the office manager. The man entered like a cannon shot, shouting even before his coat was off. This is absurd. Elias Prentice couldn't have been mixed up in anything questionable. The man was timid as a church mouse and twice as harmless. There was our red herring, freshly gift-wrapped. When men protest that loudly, it usually means they're either lying or rehearsing. Sit down, Mr. Kessler, Kramer said. But Kessler couldn't sit. His limbs moved like they were made of mismatched parts, each one convinced it had a different destination. Who found him? What happened? Was it his heart? No, Kramer replied, not his heart. At 10:23, the front door opened again. A tall, silver-templed gentleman in an expensive overcoat entered, trailed by an expression of cold annoyance. Ralph Montjoy, wealthy importer and former darling of the social pages. You could smell money on him, and money never smelled good. I came as soon as I heard, Montjoy said smoothly. Elias handled some minor accounting for me. Minor? Kramer repeated. Montjoy's smile didn't move his eyes. I have many accounts. I filed him immediately under too smooth to be useful, which was usually a sign he'd become very useful later. Around 10:30, Hazel Prentice arrived, Elias's sister, small, pale, and trembling as though her bones were tuning forks. She stared at her brother's body and covered her mouth, unable to speak. I stepped closer, softening my tone. Miss Prentice, I'm Archie Goodwin. We'll help however we can. She nodded shakily, tears glinting. Elias he didn't do anything wrong. He was frightened. Someone sent him letters. He told me he felt watched. Kramer inhaled sharply on the unlit cigar. Letters? Yes, Hazel whispered. Typed letters. He burned the last one. A smart man burns paper. A desperate one writes it. After the lineup of mourners, suspects, and performers dispersed, Pearlie stepped over with something in his thick hand. Goodwin, you can look, but it goes back. He handed me a photostat of the torn photograph. Legal, clean, permissible. I studied the image. Gloria Vale, unmistakably smiling toward the camera at the harbour. So she and Prentice had shared more than office space. Interesting. By 11:20 a.m., I'd seen enough and smelled more. The scent of that floral perfume clung to my coat like a stray cat with emotional issues. Kramer didn't stop me from leaving, though he barked, "Tell Wolfe he doesn't get to hold back this time." "Inspector," I said, "Wolfe doesn't hold back. He simply considers your deadlines theoretical." He grunted. "Tell him anyway." I left. Back at the brownstone at 12:06 p.m., I entered the office to find Wolfe reading, his lips set in the tight line that meant orchids had been cooperative that morning, and he was feeling magnanimous. "You smell offensive," he said without looking up. "Death and perfume," I replied. "It's today's signature scent." "Remove that coat from my sight at once," I obliged, tossing it into the hall like a misbehaving spaniel. "I brought you something." I handed him the photostat. He studied it. "That's Gloria Vale," I said. "Co-worker, perfume distributor on legs, claims she barely knew Prentice." "And the photograph says otherwise." Wolfe tapped the image. "The harbour. Significant." "Also," I added, "one ledger's missing." At that, Wolfe lifted his head. "The ledger. Capital L." He leaned back. "This strengthens the motif. These firms use numbers the way the unscrupulous use masks. Concealment, layer upon layer." I nodded. "Crooks writing bedtime stories for accountants." Wolfe snorted, a small sound, but in his vocabulary it meant approval. "Leave me. I must attend to the orchids at 4. "And me?" "You will write a memorandum." He paused. "Then bring me coffee." Coffee, not beer, which meant he was thinking very hard, and worried, though he'd deny it until the sun froze. I went to my desk, sat, and began to type, the keys clicking like a clock counting down to something we weren't ready for. The smell of perfume still hovered in the air, reminding me of Gloria Vale and whatever she wasn't saying. At 12:58, Fritz appeared at the doorway, never calling from the kitchen, with his ritual announcement, "Lunch is ready, gentlemen." Wolfe rose from his chair as though ascending a throne. The scene closed on his words. "Archie, dispose of that coat. It offends reason." And I knew the ledger was only just beginning to open its pages for us. If there's one thing I've learned in this trade, it's that photographs don't lie. People just work very hard to make them wish they could. The next morning, the sky had wrung itself dry, and the sidewalks glistened like polished tin by the time I stepped into Wolfe's office. Inside, the warmth hit me like a welcome-home shove. Wolfe was planted squarely at his desk, leaning back as if gravity had been instructed to behave around him. The photostat of Gloria Vale sat on the blotter, harbour skyline and all, waiting like a crossword he intended to solve with minimal regard for human frailty. "Pier 47, I announced, shrugging out of my coat. "That skyline isn't just any slice of Manhattan's waterfront. It's a crooked row of cranes you can spot even in a typhoon." Wolfe grunted. "And how do you know this?" "I once had a date with a Navy man's sister. She made me memorize the piers in case her brother quizzed me. Long story." Wolfe's eyes drifted upward in the precise arc reserved for acknowledging that I existed. "Pfui. Geography learned for the sake of dalliance is unreliable." "But accurate," I said. "Pier 47 is used for quiet shipments at even quieter hours. Our Miss Vale is standing there like she's posing for a travel brochure." He tapped a finger on the photograph. "You will go, but not before we acquire a retainer." I spread my hands. "Who's the client?" As though on cue, Wolfe would call it coincidence, I'd call it narrative timing, the doorbell rang at 10:16. I went to answer it because Fritz, being Fritz, was likely in the kitchen whisking something that needed whisking, and would never dream of abandoning a sauce for a doorbell. Hazel Prentice stood on the stoop. She looked worse than she had at the office, pale, eyes swollen, holding her handbag like she feared it might run off without permission. She stepped inside and whispered, I need help." Wolfe didn't rise. He never does for anything less than a meteor strike, but his voice softened at the edges. "Miss Prentice, please sit." She perched on the red chair like it was made of needles. "My brother. He was frightened. He kept saying someone was after him. This was before he wrote to you." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You knew he intended to seek my assistance?" She nodded and retrieved something from her handbag. He sent me this 3 days ago. It's a copy of a letter he wrote himself. A warning. I took the page from her trembling hands. Not an original, no danger of violating police property, but the message was ugly enough. If anything happens to me, it will be because of the ledger. Do not trust anyone connected to the shipments. E.P. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Capital L. Hazel nodded. He said it was dangerous. He said he wished he'd never agreed to keep it. Miss Prentice, Wolfe said, my feet... She opened her handbag again and produced an envelope containing a handful of small bills. It's all I have. Please. I don't care about the money. I want to know what happened to Elias. I'll give Wolfe this much. He can be as soft as whipped custard when the situation calls for it, as long as no one is looking for sentiment. He accepted the envelope with a solemn nod. Very well. I am engaged. Hazel exhaled with relief bordering on collapse. After she left, Fritz intercepting her on the way out with an offer of water she was too distraught to accept, Wolfe jerked his chin at me. Pier 47, now. That the royal decree? That is common sense. His eyes narrowed. Exercise your faculties with restraint. If Miss Vale seeks to engage you in proximity, resist. I always resist proximity until the second temptation, I said. Besides, I can handle danger better than you can handle a delayed dinner. He issued a snort that lived somewhere between annoyance and concern. Archie, do not be a fool. Which, coming from Wolfe, was practically a declaration of fraternal affection. Pier 47 sits on the river like a guilty thought that refuses to sink. I arrived at 11:42, the water slapping against the pilings, gulls arguing overhead. The smell of engine grease, brine, and wet timber hit like a punch from an old friend. Then there she was, Gloria Vale, leaning against a wooden crate, cigarette in hand, looking impossibly composed for a woman who'd lost a co-worker to poison less than 12 hours ago. Her perfume drifted across the air, same floral punch I'd met in the ledger room, a scent with ambition. Well, she said, blowing smoke toward the water, I wondered when you'd find me. I'm a regular bloodhound, I told her, though my nose is still recovering from that perfume you favour. It's got reach, she smirked. If you must know, it's imported jasmine, she flicked ash. Elias liked it. Enough to photograph you wearing it, I replied, pulling out the photostat. Her eyes flicked to it, too fast, too precise. We were friends, she said. That's all. You men always imagine the dramatic. That's because you women work so hard to supply us with drama. She stepped closer, too close. Elias was troubled. He didn't tell me why. Her hand drifted toward my jacket pocket with the stealth of a seasoned pickpocket. I caught her wrist lightly. Careful, that's company property. She smiled without apology. Old habits. I thought perhaps you'd brought something else of his, something he might have left behind. Just the charm and good looks, I said, and various receipts. Gloria's lashes lowered. She wasn't rattled, she was calculating, always a bad sign. She stepped back, letting her cigarette dangle dramatically. Elias was nervous last week. He said he'd seen something on the shipments, something that didn't make sense. Numbers not adding up? Numbers missing. She gestured at the crates. Some shipments had no entries, just dashes, 3 of them. Dashes, I repeated. That's unusual bookkeeping. Even I know that. She flicked the cigarette into the water. If you find what he was tracking, it might explain everything. After she left, I walked along the pier until I found what Wolfe would call a provocation to thought. A torn scrap of ledger paper wedged between 2 crate slats. The corner only, but the markings were unmistakable. 3-line entries, each marked with a long dash instead of a number. A clue, gift-wrapped. I pocketed the scrap, legal, stray trash, not evidence, and headed back. Coffee in 2 porcelain cups. Wolfe in full analytical mode, my coat in the hall still smelling of imported jasmine and quiet danger, and the ledger, capital L, was beginning to show its teeth. If you want to see a grown man question his life choices, hand him a torn scrap of ledger paper that smells like river rot and scandal. Wolfe reacted exactly as expected. When I stepped into the office with the fragment Gloria Vale had gifted the world by dropping it between 2 crates, Wolfe was angled back in his chair, hands forming a small pyramid over his stomach, eyes half-lidded in concentration that would have made a philosopher jealous. He looked up as I approached, extending 2 fingers in a gesture that meant, place it here, Don't talk yet. I put the scrap on the blotter. The river scent still clung to it, damp wood, ink, and the faint chemical bitterness of whatever had soaked the pier boards for 20 years straight. Wolfe lifted the piece as though it were a delicate orchid petal. No numbers, he murmured. An erasure of arithmetic, as though someone feared arithmetic more than homicide. That's creative, I said. Most people fear homicide more than math. Wolfe gave me a glance that implied I was stretching his tolerance thin. The dashes mark entries intentionally effaced. 3 shipments, 3 deliberate absences. Whoever did it didn't want anyone following the money. Phooey, Wolfe said. The money is irrelevant. What matters is motive hidden behind blankness. Before I could weigh in on that metaphysical declaration, the phone rang at 11:37. Wolfe gestured sharply for silence. I answered and heard Kramer's gravel pit voice. "Goodwin, put Wolfe on." Wolfe extended his hand without looking up, still studying the torn scrap as though it might reveal the secrets of the universe if glared at long enough. "This is Wolfe." Kramer's tone was clipped, but absent its usual Molotov edge. "We found more perfume traces on the doorframe, and Stebbins thinks someone was looking for something. You're not the only ones getting pieces of this puzzle." "I never assumed we were," Wolfe replied. "Why the call?" "I need your read on something." Kramer paused, which for him was practically foreplay. "That ledger scrap you got from Goodwin. What do the blanks mean?" "You presume much," Wolfe said mildly. "They're connected to the murder. Don't play coy. You're already in it neck deep." Wolfe's eyes glinted. "My involvement is due to an engagement with Miss Hazel Prentice. I answer to her interests, not to the police. I'm asking for cooperation." "And you shall have it," Wolfe said, "within appropriate boundaries." He gave Kramer a measured explanation of the missing entries, enough to confirm the police weren't chasing shadows, but not enough to reveal the structure forming behind Wolfe's eyes like scaffolding. When Kramer asked for more, Wolfe declined with a courteous firmness that would have made a diplomat weep. Kramer exhaled smoke I could practically smell over the line. "Fine. You're right about one thing. The missing numbers weren't accidental." A pause. "Wolfe, you see angles I don't. I know that." It wasn't praise. It was professional acknowledgement issued from one battlefield trench to another. Wolfe accepted it with a single, almost invisible nod before handing me the phone. Kramer wasn't done. "Goodwin, tell Wolfe I'll send someone for further questioning if we dig up anything else, and tell him no press stunts. Not yet." "We don't do stunts," I said. "Sure, and I'm the Easter Bunny." He hung up. Wolfe sniffed. The inspector's mood is improved. Perhaps he slept. "Or perhaps," I said, "he's starting to realize someone's playing games above his pay grade." Wolfe grunted. "We shall see." At 12:22, someone knocked on the front door. 3 sharp, precise taps. That ruled out Pearlie, ruled out telegram boys, and ruled out anyone who needed to rehearse their courage. I opened it to reveal Saul Panzer, flat cap angled properly, expression unreadable. "Hello, Archie," he said in that mild way of his, like he was arriving for tea rather than investigative collaboration. "Wolfe home?" "He's home, he's seated, he's thinking, and he's ready for news." Saul nodded and followed me inside. Wolfe greeted him with genuine warmth, the warmth of a man who'd never say the word friend, but wouldn't object if someone else did. Saul produced his notebook. "I ran down the background you asked for," he said. Good old Saul. No preambles, no wasted syllables. Gloria Vale, he continued, kept a routine that wasn't routine. Regular late-night taxi trips last month. Same destination every time, a midtown penthouse. "Montjoy's," I said. Saul nodded. "Yes, Ralph Montjoy. She always paid in cash." Wolfe's finger drummed once on the desk. "Any indication of affiliation beyond business?" Saul shrugged. "Driver said she always appeared nervous going up, calm coming down. Could be an affair. Could be blackmail. Could be neither." "Which means it's probably both," I said. Saul didn't comment. He'd long since learned not to waste breath disagreeing with my leaps of intuition unless they were truly egregious. Wolfe leaned forward. "Mr. Panzer, your efforts are commendable." "Thank you," Saul said simply. I walked him out and returned to the office at 1:04. Wolfe was holding the ledger scrap as though it had passed the entrance exam for his personal museum of irritants. "Montjoy," he said. A man of means, a man of leisure, a man who maintains questionable associates. He maintains Gloria Vale, I pointed out, or she maintains him. Wolfe frowned. Her attempts to retrieve the photograph from you at Pier 47 were not idle. You heard about that? He shot me a look. Archie, you report, I deduce. I report accurately, I said, though sometimes with flair. Wolfe's lips twitched. Flair is tolerable as long as it does not compromise precision. Before I could roll out my protest, I remembered the envelope addressed to me, the one I'd pocketed before dawn and forgotten in the shuffle of ledger law. I extracted it slowly, weighing it in my hand. Cheap paper. Same shaky typewriter font as Prentice's message. Wolfe noticed instantly. What is that? The second envelope, I said, addressed to me. I figured I'd open it after breakfast. Then the day got interesting. Wolfe fixed me with a stare whose ancestry could be traced directly to medieval inquisitions. Open it. I tore the flap. Inside was a single sentence, machine-typed off-kilter on the page. If you read this, turn back now. Well, that had all the charm of a funeral invitation. Concise, I said, and not terribly welcoming, though I do appreciate fan mail from the unhinged. Wolfe took the paper from me delicately. He examined the font, spacing, indentation. Then he placed it on his blotter with the same care he'd show a dangerous insect. Someone, Wolfe said quietly, is seeking to intimidate you. They'll have to get in line, I replied. Plenty of people have tried. Most end up regretting it. Wolfe exhaled slowly through his nose, a sign, rare as Halley's Comet, that emotion had breached the perimeter. This concerns me. Hey, I said lightly, no one's poisoned my lunch yet. It concerns me nonetheless. He sat back, gaze sharpening like a honing blade. Someone believes you are vulnerable, Archie. I smirked. They haven't met me. I do not share that belief, Wolfe said. It was spoken simply, without theatrics, but it hit with more force than any thunderclap. Wolfe's protectiveness is something he hides under 12 layers of vocabulary and stubbornness. You have to know him well to hear it. I heard it. Before the moment could stretch into sentimental territory, dangerous ground for both of us, the elevator whirred upstairs. Orchid hours were approaching. Wolfe pressed the bell cord. Fritz, he called, bring coffee. When Fritz arrived with 2 cups at exactly 1:19, the warm scent filling the room, Wolfe lifted his cup like a formal salute. Archie, he said, his tone returning to its usual ironclad composure, we proceed. And that was the ritual closure, as solid as any door being locked behind us. The ledger was no longer just a problem, it was a warning, and somebody out there thought they could scare me off. Poor fool. In my line of work, you learn to judge a man by his penthouse decor, and Ralph Montjoy decorated like he expected the Hudson River to applaud him every morning. The elevator that carried me up to Montjoy's 31st floor palace moved with the kind of soundless wealth you only hear in buildings where the rent is high enough to make your accountant weep. When the doors opened, a wall of chrome, glass, and river-view arrogance greeted me like a maitre d' with superiority issues. The place was all angles and shine, floor-to-ceiling windows staring out shamelessly at Manhattan, cocktail bar stocked with enough liquor to embalm a small army, and furniture so modern it looked offended by the idea of comfort. Montjoy emerged from behind a glossy desk, dressed in a suit that cost more than my monthly salary, and smug enough to have its own zip code. His hair was silvered just so, and his smile was the kind a man practices in the mirror after firing someone. Mr. Goodwin, he said with a silky tone that made me want to check for oiled handrails. I received word you wished to speak with me. I like to stay active, I said. Running around keeps me fit, saves Fritz from cutting down on the butter. He didn't laugh. I hadn't expected him to. Men like Montjoy save their emotions for tax season. I took a slow walk around the perimeter of the room, letting the silence grow long enough to bother him. It worked. He cleared his throat. I understand this concerns Elias Prentice, he said, among other things. I hardly knew the man. His voice was smooth as velvet and twice as untrustworthy. He handled some minor accounts, nothing of note. A pleasant red herring, wrapped in expensive tailoring. Minor accounts, I asked. Funny thing, people usually don't end up poisoned over minor accounts. His smile thinned. I'm sorry he's dead, but I'm afraid I can't help you. Before I could respond, a door opened, and the jasmine cloud entered before she did. Gloria Vale stepped in, wearing a dress that matched the skyline, sleek, sharp, and built to distract. Her perfume rolled over me like déjà vu wearing lipstick. "Oh," she said lightly, "Mr. Goodwin, following me again?" "Only when the scent is this persistent," I replied. Montjoy's gaze flicked between us. "You know Miss Vale?" "We've exchanged aromatherapy," I said. Gloria rolled her eyes, though her mouth twitched. "I'm here as a consultant to Mr. Montjoy. Imports, logistics, nothing clandestine." "Imports," I echoed. "Ah, yes. Perfume? Harbour photography? Late-night taxi rides?" Montjoy's expression hardened, but Gloria stepped in smoothly. "Your implication is noted. It's also incorrect." "Most of my implications are," I said, "until they aren't." Montjoy moved back to his desk, flipping open a ledger book. Not the ledger, but a tame, presentable one used for polite company. "If you need reassurance," he said, "I was at my warehouse last night. The doorman signed me in. You may check." Ah, the alibi. Red herring number 2 delivered with silver-plated confidence. "Very tidy," I said. "Truth often is," Montjoy replied. "Not in my experience," I told him. "Truth usually shows up in wrinkled pants and a stained shirt." While Montjoy waxed poetic about his spotless character, my eye drifted upward. Above his desk, pinned neatly like a piece of modern art, was a rare South American freight map, detailed and obviously expensive. And across 3 shipping routes, 3 precise narrow lines, were bright red strokes of pencil, thick, deliberate, and angry enough to scream. 3 routes, 3 missing entries, 3 dashes in the ledger. My pulse ticked upward, but I kept my expression flat. Wolfe would have been proud. He trains me well in the fine art of appearing dumb, right when I'm thinking hardest. Montjoy followed my gaze. A map from my early days, pure nostalgia. "Looks like someone went at it with a red pencil," I noted. "A child visited once," Montjoy lied smoothly. "Children," I said, "are always defacing import route maps. It's practically a developmental milestone." Before he could retort, Gloria drifted closer. "Mr. Goodwin," she said quietly, "I want a word, alone." Montjoy bristled, but I followed her toward the balcony. The door slid open and a gust of river wind tangled her hair. She folded her arms against the cold, expression sharpening. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "If Elias left you a letter, burn it." "That's friendly," I said. "Most people advise me to read letters." She leaned nearer, jasmine thick in the air. "Some things aren't meant to be read." "Lucky for you," I said. "I'm not much of a burner, except calories." "Goodwin," she began, but Montjoy called her back sharply. She didn't get to finish her warning, but I filed it away next to my growing list of curiosities: perfume, photographs, secrecy, and now a very clear fear of letters. By 12:48, I'd squeezed the penthouse dry of charm and lies. Montjoy extended a hand in a gesture meant to signal civility. I shook it, mostly to check if his palm was as smooth as his ego. "Good day, Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Please convey my condolences to Mr. Wolfe." "I'll do that," I replied. "He's always cheered by condolences." Back at the brownstone at 124, Wolfe was emerging from the elevator. Orchids tended, patience restored, appetite imminent. I launched into a full recounting. Montjoy's penthouse, Gloria's act, the map, the red pencil, and the warning about letters. Wolfe listened with the face of a man assembling a cathedral out of matchsticks. When I finished, he muttered, "Confound it," which, in Wolfe's lexicon, resides directly between intriguing and alarming. "You saw the map?" he asked. 3 routes, red pencil, very angry lines. "And Miss Vale's warning?" "Burn the letter." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. "Imbecilic advice. You never burn a document unless you are guilty or terrified, sometimes both." "I choose neither," I said. "I'm keeping my collection tidy." At 1:56, the phone rang again. I answered. Lon Cohen at the Gazette sounded like he'd been chasing deadlines with both shoes untied. "Archie," he said, "I tried to warn you, but the editor ran it anyway." "Ran what?" "Story says Wolfe may be withholding evidence. Kramer didn't confirm it, but someone whispered it to the city desk. Sorry." I hung up and relayed the news. Wolfe's eyes snapped open. His neck stiffened. His lips formed a line that would have scared off a firing squad. "They dare," he growled. "Looks like it," I said. He didn't rise. He never does. But the force of his indignation practically made the floorboards take a step backward. "We will address that," Wolfe said coldly. "But first, the ledger. Bring me the scrap again." I placed the fragment on his desk. He leaned in, studying the torn corner with the intense, predatory focus of a hawk watching a mouse make ill-considered life choices. Outside, the storm clouds parted slightly, letting in a pale smear of sunlight across the office carpet. Wolfe didn't notice. He was deep inside whatever geometric criminal cathedral he was constructing in that brilliant, immovable brain. And as I watched him wrestle with the invisible architecture of the case, one thing became very clear. Someone up there in the penthouse had just made themselves a candidate for Wolfe's full attention. And if Montjoy was smart, he'd start praying. Because once Wolfe fixes his mind on a man, there's no shipping route in the hemisphere that can save him. There are mornings when Manhattan wakes up polite, but the day Gloria Vale died, the city rolled over like it wanted to bite somebody, and it picked us. At 9:06 a.m., the phone rang with an edge that suggested bad news hadn't bothered to knock. Wolfe jerked his head toward it without looking up from the ledger scrap he'd been contemplating like a hostile sermon. I answered, and Kramer's gravel reached me before the phone settled against my ear. "Goodwin," he said, voice sanded down by exhaustion. "Get Wolfe and get over here. Vale's dead." My hand tightened on the receiver. "Gloria Vale?" "Yeah." A pause, more tired than irritated. "Suicide, supposedly. Don't argue. Just come, and bring Wolfe on the line." I held out the phone. Wolfe took it with the regal reluctance of a man handed the wrong wine list. "This is Wolfe." "We've got another corpse," Kramer said flatly. "Your lady friend from the pier." "She is not my—" Wolfe bit off the correction. "What do you require, Inspector?" "I want your eyes on the scene," Kramer said. "It stinks. And if this is tied to your case, hell, maybe it isn't even suicide, then you're already involved. Get over here." "You know I won't." "Fine," Kramer growled. "Then send Goodwin." Wolfe exhaled in a long, frosty ribbon. "You may speak to him directly." I raised the phone again. "Address?" "East 73rd, Kramer said. "Number 415. And Goodwin, don't touch anything you're not allowed to touch." "I'm shocked you'd think I would." "I don't think. I know." He hung up before I could reply. I pocketed my notebook and headed for the door. Wolfe's voice halted me. "Archie?" "Yes?" "Use care," which from Wolfe is the equivalent of a parental embrace. I left at 9:18, caught a cab, and rode through a city washed grey by last night's storm, the buildings leaning toward each other like they were trading warnings. Gloria Vale's apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up that had once dreamed of being respectable. The hallway smelled of last week's soup and this morning's despair. Stebbins loomed by the door like an angry refrigerator. "You," he said. "Pearly," I replied. "Nice ambience. You redecorate?" He grunted. "Kramer's inside." I slipped past him. The apartment was small, neat, and too quiet. Kramer stood beside the couch where Gloria Vale sat, or rather, where her body had been arranged to sit, slumped sideways, head tilted, hand dangling as though she'd fallen asleep reading bad poetry. On the table beside her, a smashed perfume bottle glinted like a shattered alibi. Kramer turned toward me. His face was tired, not furious. His cigar wasn't even lit. "Well?" he asked. "Well, what?" I said. "You saw her alive. Better than I did. This looked like a woman ready to bow out." "Not unless she wanted her final act to smell like imported jasmine." I approached carefully. Gloria's face was too peaceful, too still in a way that didn't belong to suicide. I scanned the room with a trained eye. The windows were shut and locked from the inside. No overturned drawers, no broken furniture. But there was something wrong about how she sat. A staged wrongness. Kramer noticed me noticing. "Go on," he muttered. "Say it." "I'll say this much. Whoever posed her wanted it to look tidy. Symmetrical. People don't die symmetrically." He scratched the back of his neck. "I figured you'd say that." Pearly stepped in behind me. "We found this," he said, holding up a small envelope. "Under the rug." "Leave it," Kramer said. "Chain of custody." But the real find came from the desk near the window. A small scrap of photo paper, the exact jagged edge that had been missing from Prentice's torn photograph. I pointed. That goes with the picture from Elias's desk. Kramer crouched to look. Damn. And this, I added, noticing a penciled note wedged half under a newspaper. I leaned without touching, reading the words. Route 3 is the key. Kramer followed my gaze. Recognize it? Only that it sounds like a scavenger hunt written by somebody in a hurry. Or somebody in fear, Kramer said. Or both, I replied. He straightened, pressing a hand to his lower back. Why Route 3? You got me, I said. But I can tell you this. Prentice mentioned 3 shipments marked with dashes. Montjoy's map had 3 red lines. And now Gloria's telling me from beyond the grave that Route 3 matters. He sucked in a breath. Which leaves us. Montjoy, I said. Kessler. Hazel Prentice. He frowned. Hazel? She's a nervous pencil. Sometimes pencils hide knives, I said. You know that. A tiny sound cracked the gloom, a soft scrape like paper sliding. I followed it to a half-open drawer. A checkbook lay inside, 1 check missing, probably ripped out yesterday. I filed that under things to mention to Wolfe. Kramer rubbed his temples. Wolfe said you'd see things. Damn him. Compliments will get you everywhere, I said. That wasn't a compliment. It was, I said cheerfully, just poorly dressed. He exhaled. Goodwin, tell Wolfe. Tell him he was right about the ledger entries. There, I said it. For Kramer, that was a handshake, a hug, and a Christmas card combined. I took one last look at Gloria. Her hair was neat, her dress unwrinkled, her lipstick perfect. No one chooses that level of poise for dying. At 10:03, I left with Kramer and Pearlie trailing behind. The street below was buzzing with police radios and curious neighbours. I breathed in the cold air, clearing the jasmine from my lungs. Back in a cab, I felt a flicker of anger, quiet, hot, and unwelcome. Gloria Vale had tried to warn me about the letters. Now she was dead. If someone thought they could scare me out of the case, they had miscalculated more than my charm. I reached the brownstone at 10:32. Wolfe was in the office, eyes closed, hands tented, appearing serene but vibrating internally like a dormant volcano. I closed the door behind me and delivered the news. Gloria Vale is dead, I said. His lids lifted. Something flashed in his eyes. Not surprise, not sorrow, but a sharp tightening of logic. How? Staged as suicide. Too neatly. Describe it. I did, detail by detail, from the smashed perfume bottle to the note about Route 3 to the missing edges of the Prentice photograph. Wolfe's nostrils flared at that. The missing piece. And it wasn't in her hand by accident, I added. Somebody wanted us to know she had it. No, Wolfe said. Someone wanted you to know. I paused. You think the note was for me, too? Wolfe tapped the desk with one finger. Archie, consider the timing. You encountered her yesterday, and today she expires with a cryptic message referencing the very route we discussed. That is directed. Directed or framed? Both, Wolfe said. I paced before the bookshelves. What about Hazel Prentice? She was jittery from the start. Jittery, Wolfe mused, but sincere. Your assessment of her was sound, though incomplete. She behaved oddly, I admitted. When I mentioned the ledger yesterday, she clammed up hard. That is expected, Wolfe said. She is withholding something, but not murder. Then Montjoy? I asked. Or Kessler? Wolfe grunted. Montjoy is capable of anything except honesty. Kessler is capable of anything except subtlety. We might have to pick between the two. Not yet, he said. At 11:04, the phone rang again. Wolfe jabbed a finger downward. You, I answered. Goodwin. Kramer's voice returned, this time with resignation soaked in. We're sending the body to the lab, but I wanted you and Wolfe to hear this from me. The suicide angle is weak. I could have told you that. You did, he sighed, but it's different hearing it in the report. Anything else? Yeah, he said. Tell Wolfe. Tell him thanks. I blinked. You sure? No, he said. But tell him anyway. He hung up. Wolfe arched a brow. The inspector expressed gratitude? That's the rumour. Then he is fatigued or afflicted. I sat, jotting notes. Wolfe, we've got 2 bodies in 2 days. both touching the ledger, both tied to Route 3. He closed his eyes. That route. Something was smuggled, something of value. Contraband? I asked. Perhaps, or something political. He opened his eyes. The absence of numbers is deliberate, not to hide money, but to hide meaning. I thought meaning was your realm, I said. It is, he replied, and thus I shall determine it. The clock ticked. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled by. Inside, the room tightened around the problem like a noose around an idea. I leaned back. Wolfe, someone's tightening the circle. Prentice, Gloria, and someone sent me that warning letter. Wolfe frowned deeply. That vexes me. That I might be in danger? That someone presumes you are, he corrected. It is insufferably condescending. I grinned. I appreciate your faith in my resilience. I appreciate nothing, Wolfe said, except facts. But his tone cracked at the edges, which told me the truth. He was worried. At 11:48, Fritz appeared at the doorway. Lunch, gentlemen? Wolfe rose with the gravity of a monarch. Archie, summarize the scene in writing after lunch. Yes, sir. And do not go anywhere alone this afternoon. Yes, sir. He stopped halfway to the dining room and looked over his shoulder. Archie. Yes. Your flippancy is ill-timed. It's my coping mechanism. Pfui. And with that ceremonial dismissal, he swept off to lunch, leaving me with my anger, my notes, and the image of Gloria Vale posed like a puppet for someone else's script. But whoever staged that scene had forgotten one thing. I don't scare easily. And Wolfe, well, Wolfe doesn't scare at all. Some apartments welcome you with flowers or a smile. Hazel Prentice's welcomed me with the distinct impression that even the dust motes had been arranged alphabetically. Her building on West 92nd was the kind of polite, aging structure that had given up competing with modern Manhattan and decided to survive through modest charm. I climbed the narrow stairwell at 10:14 a.m., my footsteps echoing faintly on linoleum that tried its best. Hazel opened the door before I knocked twice. She looked smaller than I remembered, like grief had filed her down since our first meeting. Mr. Goodwin, she whispered, please, come in. The apartment was tidy to the point of compulsion. Every book stood upright, every knick-knack squared to the edge, and the place smelled faintly of lemon polish and reluctant solitude. It wasn't hard to picture Hazel cleaning while worrying, worrying while cleaning, and repeating the cycle until the floors and her nerves were equally scrubbed raw. I softened my voice. I need to ask you some things. You up for that? She nodded, twisting a handkerchief until it begged for mercy. If it helps Elias, I'll try. I began gently. Your brother mentioned the ledger, capital L. Did he ever explain what he meant? Hazel hesitated. Not exactly. He said something wasn't right, that certain shipments didn't match what the company claimed. He was afraid someone was using the routes to smuggle bonds. Unregistered bonds, I asked. She nodded. Yes. He said they'd be small, light, easy to hide, and worth everything to the wrong men. I paced the room, checking my angles. Wolfe would want exactness. Kramer would demand legality. My eyes slid across the shelf, one item out of place. A framed photograph not quite aligned with the others. I lifted it gently. Behind it was a small wall safe. Hazel paled. Elias told me never to show that to anyone, not unless he was gone, I supplied. She swallowed. Yes. Miss Prentice, I'm not the NYPD. I'm Wolfe's boy. You can trust me. She considered this, then nodded once. Sharp, decisive. All right. She knelt and turned the dial with trembling fingers. The lock clicked open, revealing a neat stack of certified photostat copies, ledger pages, stamped, initialed, government clean. I exhaled low. You know this is legal to hold, right? These aren't originals. That's why he made copies, Hazel said. He wanted insurance. I scanned the pages, rows of shipment data, figures neat as a church ledger, everything straightforward except 3 entries marked only with dashes, 3 ghosts in the paperwork. These are the same missing entries Prentice wrote about. Yes. You know what they are? No, she whispered. If I did, I'd have gone to the police myself. Elias said it was dangerous, that someone inside the company knew he'd discovered it. He said if anything happened to him, she bit her lip. I was supposed to bring these to Mr. Wolfe. You're doing that now, I said. You're doing right. She lowered her head, shaking. Gloria, why did they kill her? Because she knew something, I said, or someone thought she did. A red herring floated through my mind. Maybe Gloria's death had nothing to do with the ledger. Maybe she'd had her own enemies. Maybe Montjoy's penthouse had more secrets than furniture. But the moment I thought it, I knew it stunk. Too convenient. Too sloppy. Hazel looked up at me suddenly. Am I in danger? I crouched so we were eye level. Hazel, I won't lie. Someone has gone to a lot of trouble to keep these shipments quiet, but you're under Wolfe's protection now. For the first time, she smiled weakly. Does that mean he cares? I snorted. As much as Wolfe cares about anyone he didn't give birth to, which he didn't, by the way. She almost laughed. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Call me Archie, I said. When I left at 11:02, the cold air felt like an accusation. Someone had put Hazel in the crosshairs without her even knowing it, and if Wolfe had a sentimental streak he hid under a ton of vocabulary, I had one buried under too many jokes. Back at the brownstone at 11:37, Wolfe was at his desk, fingertips pressed together, appearing as serene as a mountain that could erupt at any moment. I handed him the certified ledger copies. His eyes sharpened. Ah, he murmured, spreading the pages out in strict geometric order. Better. Hazel had them hidden, I said. She thinks someone inside the firm used the routes to smuggle unregistered bonds. Wolfe inhaled through his nose, a sound like intellectual triumph slipping into gear. Plausible. Bonds require concealment, and import ledgers offer shelter. Nicely done. You're welcome, I said. I'll add it to my resume under legally acquired documents. He ignored me, which in Wolfe speak meant approval. Before I could continue, a soft knock came at 11:52. I opened the door to reveal Saul Pantzer, flat cap angled like always, expression calm enough to sell insurance to thunderstorms. Saul, I said, tell me you've got good news. I've got news, he said. Wolfe gestured him in. Saul sat without being asked, one of the very few who had earned that privilege. I followed the Montjoy money trail, Saul said, opening his notebook. Multiple accounts, some official, some not, and funds moved fast, very fast. How fast, I asked. Fast enough to make you wonder what they were hiding, 500,000 over 6 weeks. Smuggling bonds would do that, I muttered. Saul held up a hand. But that's not the part you want. Wolfe leaned forward. Speak. Saul turned a page. Hazel Prentice received $10,000 3 days before Elias was killed. I felt it like a punch. Wolfe, however, did not flinch. Explain. Saul shrugged. Transfer came from an unregistered intermediate account. Purpose unknown. She didn't withdraw it, didn't touch it, didn't even know about it. I slammed my notebook shut. So the nervous sister isn't so innocent. Wolfe glared at me, a glacial, slicing look. Archie, Hazel Prentice is terrified, poor and honest. She did not solicit money. She did not hide it. She does not even know it exists. Maybe she's playing us. She is not. Wolfe's tones snapped across the room like a whip. You misjudge her. That's what you said about Gloria, I shot back, instantly regretting it. Wolfe's jaw tightened. Miss Vale was a different case. Her motives were complex. Hazel's are not. Saul watched us, expression unreadable. Wolfe finally exhaled. Archie, he said more gently, Hazel's deposit is an attempt to cast suspicion upon her. A clumsy one. Clumsy, I repeated. $10,000 is pretty convincing. For the unimaginative, Wolfe replied. But look closer. She did not withdraw it. She did not spend it. She hid nothing. The money was placed to implicate her, not to benefit her. Then who benefits? I asked. Montjoy, Wolfe said. Or Kessler, or both. Saul nodded. He's right. This kind of deposit, unsigned, unclaimed, is classic misdirection. I leaned back, rubbing my jaw. All right, so Hazel's clean. I said she was frightened, Wolfe corrected. Not clean. She conceals something emotional, not criminal. Sentimentality, I said, must be a side effect of beer. Wolfe shot me a stare that could freeze lava. Archie, do not tempt me to alter your salary. I'll try, I said. But temptation is cheap these days. Wolfe returned to the documents, eyes narrowing at the dashes on the ledger pages. Mr. Pantzer, he said, your efforts were excellent. Continue watching Montjoy's accounts. Quietly. Saul nodded and rose. I'll check in tomorrow. After he left, silence filled the office, thick as harbour fog. Wolfe continued studying the ledger copies, muttering under his breath, snippets of French and English, a vocabulary hybrid that signalled deep concentration. Finally he said, Archie, these shipments, all three, are tied to Route 3. Gloria's note said as much. Yes, and I believe she meant for you to see it. Me? You, Wolfe said firmly. Someone thinks you are more reachable than I. Reachable? I repeated. Or killable? Wolfe's eyes flicked up. I said reachable. Do not embellish. I sighed. So now Hazel's scared, Gloria's dead, Montjoy's sweating behind his chrome furniture, and someone's laundering bonds through shipping routes. A picturesque summary, Wolfe said. Now fetch Fritz. I require coffee. Which was Wolfe's way of saying, the game is far from over. By the time Wolfe decided to summon every suspect to the brownstone, the office felt less like a room and more like a pressure cooker waiting for someone to twist the wrong knob. It started shortly after lunch, at 1:42 p.m, when Wolfe pushed aside the empty custard dish, wiped his lips with the linen napkin Fritz hovered beside, and declared, Archie, we will require all principals present. The situation now demands confrontation. With Wolfe, those words always carried the weight of a royal decree. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath the famous dome of his forehead. Dispatch summonses, all of them. All of them? I repeated. Montjoy included? Anne Kessler? Hazel Prentice? And who's the fourth lucky contestant? Eugene Rafferty, Wolfe said, the junior clerk. Elias Prentice trusted him. That is sufficient justification. Fine, I said. Should I request evening wear or keep it informal? Do not, Wolfe replied frostily. Attempt levity at the expense of order. Order, sure, I said. Levity? Pure accident. By 2:07, the invitations were delivered through phones, messages, and the occasional charm offensive necessary to coax a reluctant suspect into Wolfe's spiderweb. Montjoy took the summons with glossy arrogance, Kessler with a snort, Hazel with trembling gratitude, Rafferty with a nervous stutter. Each agreed to arrive between 3 o'clock and 4:30, an afternoon parade of guilt, fear, ego, and confusion. Wolfe spent the interim poring over the certified ledger pages like they were scripture misprinted by a particularly clumsy angel. His eyes darted down columns over sums across the dashes of the mysterious shipments. Confound it, he muttered more than once. Confound their ingenuity. Confound their stupidity. At 3:04 the doorbell rang. Fritz answered it with the solemn dignity of a Swiss diplomat. Martin Kessler entered first, large, red-faced, chest puffed like a rooster with something to prove. His coat smelled faintly of tobacco and cheap superiority. Kessler, he barked at me, though barking my name was unnecessary since he didn't know it. Where is this Wolfe fellow? I demand you tell me why I was called here like some schoolboy. You'll get answers, I said pleasantly, if you manage to avoid rupturing a lung before Wolfe sees you. He glared and stomped into the office. Wolfe lifted his gaze without rising. Mr. Kessler, your punctuality is commendable. Please, sit. I'll stand, Kessler snapped. As you wish, Wolfe replied. Mr. Goodwin, record. I opened my notebook. Kessler began with a rant about baseless accusations and damned interruptions to business. But beneath the rumbling indignation was something interesting. Fear. Not much, but enough to peek out from behind his bluster when Wolfe asked, Did Miss Vale ever handle shipments beyond her clerical duties? Kessler froze. What? No. Well, maybe once. Some special consignment Montjoy insisted she record personally. There it is, I murmured. Kessler shot me a glare capable of bruising wallpaper. It was routine, he insisted. Just paperwork. A special shipment, Wolfe said softly. Which route? How should I know? Kessler exploded. I wasn't watching her every move. Quite, Wolfe murmured. Thank you. Kessler stomped out to the front room to cool down. Fritz met him like an unmovable stone and directed him to sit until the others arrived. At 3:36, Ralph Montjoy arrived, perfectly pressed and radiating the smug confidence of a man who believed chrome surfaces and good whiskey cured guilt. He removed his gloves with slow precision, as though disrobing arrogance layer by layer. "Mr. Wolfe," he said with a patronizing smile, "I'm here out of courtesy, not compliance." "That distinction," Wolfe said, "is irrelevant." He gestured to a chair. "Sit." Montjoy sat, crossing one leg over the other. "I trust this won't take long." "That depends," Wolfe said, "on your candour." Montjoy smiled without warmth. "I'm always candid." Behind him, Archie Goodwin added, "Within the limits of self-interest." Montjoy ignored me. Wolfe began, "Mr. Montjoy, 3 shipments under your firm, all routed through the South American corridor, appear undocumented. Why?" Montjoy dabbed his mouth with a handkerchief, purely to avoid answering. "Clerical oversight," he said. "Phooey," Wolfe replied. Montjoy stiffened. The sweat on his temple glistened beneath the late afternoon sun filtering through the office blinds. He rambled about legitimate business, honest dealings, respectable clients, and philanthropic ventures. Not one word meant anything. By the time Wolfe dismissed him to the outer room, Montjoy's self-assurance had leaked down the collar of his immaculate shirt. At 4:02, Hazel Prentice entered, small, pale, and trembling. Fritz showed her in kindly. She clutched her handbag as if it were a lifeline. Wolfe's tone softened by a degree. "Miss Prentice, please sit." She obeyed, eyes shiny. "You wished to speak to me more privately yesterday," Wolfe said. "Now is the time." Hazel hesitated. I gave her an encouraging nod. "Miss Prentice, we're here to help, not harm." She took a breath. Gloria Vale. She said she knew something about Ralph Montjoy. She said he was paying her, or she was paying him, I don't know, but she said she had leverage." "Leverage?" I asked. "Blackmail," Hazel whispered. I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe she meant something else, but when Elias died, I thought Gloria might be next, and now she's gone. Her voice broke. Wolfe let her finish quietly, then asked, "Did your brother mention who threatened him?" Hazel swallowed. "He said someone confronted him in the ledger room. Someone he didn't expect. Someone he thought was on his side." "Who?" I asked. I don't know." Wolfe nodded slowly. "You have done well, Miss Prentice. You may wait with the others." Hazel left, still trembling. My chest tightened a fraction watching her go. At 4:27 the last arrival appeared. Eugene Rafferty. A skinny kid with ink-stained cuffs, earnest eyes, and the posture of a man who apologized to furniture after bumping it. He sat gingerly. "Mr. Wolfe, sir. I don't want trouble. I just want to keep my job." "Young man," Wolfe said. "Death has already taken 2 lives. You will speak." Rafferty nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. I saw Mr. Prentice 2 nights before he died. He was in the ledger room, and he wasn't alone." Wolfe leaned forward. "Describe the other person." Rafferty swallowed. "I didn't see the face, but it was a man, tall, wearing a dark coat. Mr. Prentice said, 'This is wrong. I won't be part of it.' Then the other man said—" Rafferty hesitated. "He said, 'It's too late. Route 3 sails Thursday.'" My pulse jumped. So did Wolfe's eyebrow. "That is all?" Wolfe asked. "Yes, sir." When Rafferty left, Wolfe closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. The office, crowded with tension, felt like a coiled spring awaiting release. At 5:12, Wolfe pushed his chair back. "Archie." "Here." "We dine at 8. After dinner, I reveal the truth." "You're torturing me," I said. "Your constitution is resilient." "You just like lecturing with a full stomach." "A nourished brain," Wolfe said, "protects your hide." I groaned, but accepted it. Wolfe moved toward the elevator for Orchid Hour, the ritual that no murder investigation could disrupt. At 5:16 sharp, he paused, turned back and said, "Prepare yourself. Tomorrow's revelation will be consequential." "Tomorrow? Why tomorrow?" He reached for the bell cord. "Because I intend for Inspector Kramer to be present." "And he'll agree?" "I will ensure it." At 5:19, Wolfe dialed Kramer with the serenity of a priest calling vespers. "Inspector," he said calmly, "I request your presence here tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for a formal accusation." A silence crackled over the line. Then Kramer growled, "Wolfe, If you've got something, I'm coming. Wolfe closed his eyes. Oh, I have something. He hung up. And in that quiet moment, the brownstone felt like a powder keg waiting for Wolfe's matchstick voice. Some mornings the brownstone feels like a fortress, but on the day Wolfe staged his showdown, it felt more like a courtroom built out of tension, carpet, and Fritz's best furniture polish. The air in Wolfe's office at 9:57 a.m. was thick enough to slice. Fritz had aired the room early, but even his diligence couldn't compete with the emotional humidity of 5 suspects, an irritated police inspector, a bulldog sergeant, and one oversized genius preparing to verbally dismantle a killer. The windows were cracked an inch, letting in the cool bite of November, but the bodies inside more than compensated. Kramer arrived first at 9:50, announced by the solid thud of his shoes and the equally solid look in his eyes. He carried the weight of 2 murders on his shoulders and the familiar dread of visiting Wolfe's kingdom. Pearly Stebbins followed, jaw set, arms folded like a built-in barricade. Behind them, Montjoy in an immaculate suit, Kessler in a sweat-soaked one, Hazel clutching her handbag like it was life support, and Eugene Rafferty shifting from foot to foot, emitting nervous energy like a cheap lamp shorting on a rainy night. I took my place at my desk near the wall, notebook open, pen ready. Wolfe, who had orchestrated the seating arrangement like a military general mapping trenches, settled into his chair with the majesty of a man preparing to sculpt the truth out of human panic. "Gentlemen, Miss Prentice," he began, voice deep and cool as a cellar, "thank you for attending. The matter before us is grave. 2 deaths, 1 conspiracy, and the truth, long concealed, now ripe." Montjoy leaned back, crossing one polished shoe over the other. "If this is some elaborate performance, Wolfe..." Wolfe raised one eyebrow. Montjoy shrank an inch. "Good start." Wolfe continued, "The ledger at Atherton and Clay Imports contains 3 entries marked only with dashes, not numbers, not letters, dashes." He tapped the certified photostat on his desk. "Such omissions are not clerical error, they are deliberate." Kessler huffed. "I've told you, that was a filing mistake." "Phooey," Wolfe said calmly. "You are not competent enough to disguise your agitation, Mr. Kessler. Mistakes do not repeat 3 times in identical fashion. These dashes signified blackmail, shipments used not for goods, but for extortion." Hazel Prentice gasped softly. Rafferty swallowed loudly. Montjoy's expression tightened, as if someone had scratched his chrome penthouse furniture. Wolfe steepled his fingers. 2 employees handled these entries, Elias Prentice and Gloria Vale. Prentice discovered the pattern. Vale, seeing profit, joined the scheme. They were not partners in crime, but in fear, each suspecting the other, yet too terrified of their superior to step forward. Montjoy opened his mouth. "Are you implying—" "Silence," Wolfe said, not raising his voice but increasing his authority tenfold. "You will speak when addressed." My pen paused just to admire the effect. Wolfe resumed. "Montjoy, you initiated the payments, funds routed through clandestine channels, masked by legitimate shipments. You used Gloria Vale as intermediary. Her beauty and discretion made her ideal for handling sensitive transfers." Hazel whispered, "Gloria wasn't bad. She was just scared." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Fear motivates fools and victims alike, but the true architect of the violence was not Miss Vale, nor Mr. Prentice." He shifted his gaze to Kessler. Kessler stiffened. Kramer's eyes sharpened. Wolfe's voice dropped an inch. "Martin Kessler, Elias Prentice confronted you in the ledger room when he discovered the truth, that the smuggling of bonds was your initiative. You bullied subordinates, you controlled shipping access, and you believed yourself untouchable." Kessler's face reddened. "This is slander." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "it is the inevitable consequence of your ineptitude." That got a chuckle out of me. Wolfe shot me a glance that said, "Save your amusement for later," but he didn't chastise me. Wolfe lifted a small object from his desk, a red pencil. Not much to look at, but in the right hands, evidence can roar louder than a gunshot. "This," Wolfe said, "is the pencil you used to mark the 3 routes on Mr. Montjoy's map. The same routes reflected as dashes in the ledger." Montjoy frowned. "That pencil is mine." "No," Wolfe corrected, "it was yours, past tense. It vanished from your desk the day Archie visited your penthouse." All eyes shifted to me. I lifted my hands. Don't look at me. I wasn't in a red pencil-stealing mood. You did not steal it, Wolfe said. You merely picked it up while speaking with Mr. Montjoy. Mr. Kessler, who followed Archie unseen, retrieved it after he left, intending to place the blame on Mr. Montjoy should discrepancies be discovered. Kramer turned to Kessler. Is that true? Kessler sputtered. Of course not. Why would I? This is absurd. Wolfe leaned forward. Kessler, Gloria Vale realized you had been orchestrating the scheme. She confronted you. She demanded money. You paid her, small sums at first, then more. But when Prentice threatened exposure and Gloria grew bold, you panicked. Hazel clenched her hands together. You killed them, didn't you? Kessler looked ready to explode. Shut up! You don't know anything! On the contrary, Wolfe said, she knows enough. You murdered Elias Prentice in his office by staging a scene that implied natural cause. You returned later, removed the torn photograph edges linking you to Gloria, and thought the matter closed. Kramer stood slowly, expression grim. But Gloria Vale, Wolfe went on, was not finished extorting you. When she threatened to expose everything, including the real meaning of Route 3, you lured her to her apartment, smothered her, and staged her suicide. A silence clamped the room. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, the perfume? Same scent from the ledger room, I said. Gloria's. Wolfe nodded. Kessler smashed the bottle afterward to mislead us into believing she died emotionally distraught. Montjoy rose, flustered. I demand to clear my name. I had no part in killing. You had part in corruption, Wolfe cut in, not homicide. You are guilty of cowardice and greed, not blood. Montjoy sat, chastened by a single sentence. Kessler, sweating rivers now, gripped the arms of his chair. This is insane. You have no proof, just theories, words. Wolfe lifted a hand. Inspector Kramer. Kramer stepped forward. Wolfe continued. The pencil's angle markings match the ledger notations. Rafferty saw Kessler leaving the ledger room. Hazel's deposit was a transfer from Elias Prentice meant to protect her, proof of his innocence and his knowledge of danger, not complicity. And finally, he paused, letting the moment breathe. Your reaction, Mr. Kessler, confirms everything. What reaction? Kessler spat. Wolfe nodded at me. I took the ledger scrap from my pocket, legal copy of course, and held it up. This, I said, is the note Gloria left. Route 3 is the key. Kessler's eyes widened so sharply you could have hung a coat on them. Kramer saw it. Pearlie. Pearlie stepped forward. Kessler bolted upward, too late, and Pearlie seized him like a professional wrestler greeting an old friend. She tried to. Prentice threatened, Kessler choked out. Save it, Kramer growled. You'll get your chance. Hazel buried her face in her hands. Montjoy exhaled as though relieved the bullet had missed him. Rafferty looked like he'd seen a ghost teaching arithmetic. Wolfe leaned back, settling like a king watching judgment unfold. Inspector, the evidence is yours. Kramer nodded. Then, incredibly, he extended a hand toward Wolfe. You know, he said quietly, you may have saved us weeks. Wolfe regarded the hand, then touched it lightly. No shake, but acknowledgement. You are welcome, Inspector. And Goodwin? I raised my eyebrows. Nice work, Kramer said gruffly. I grinned. Coming from you, that's practically a marriage proposal. Can it? Kramer muttered, heading for the door with Kessler in tow. Pearlie followed, hauling the killer like luggage. Hazel stood shakily. Mr. Wolfe, thank you. You owe your brother gratitude, not me, Wolfe replied. He protected you with his last prudent act. Montjoy rose stiffly. I owe you clarification. I was ignorant of Kessler's actions. You were ignorant of everything except money, I told him. Montjoy scowled, but Wolfe lifted one eyebrow again, shutting him down instantly. Mr. Montjoy, Wolfe said, you may expect a visit from the Internal Revenue Service in due course. Montjoy fled. Rafferty lingered. Should I resign? Wolfe waved a hand. No. You have been useful. Continue to be so. Rafferty nodded gratefully and slipped out. The door closed. Silence returned. Wolfe exhaled deeply, folding his hands over his stomach. Archie? Yes, sir? Beer. I rose, smiling. Coming right up. Because in the brownstone, justice may rattle the furniture, but ritual restores the world. I've always held that the brownstone looks different after a case blows over, like a theatre stage after the curtain falls and the audience shuffles away, leaving only the smell of powder and the faint echo of applause. That late afternoon, with the ledger case wrapped tighter than Fritz's strudel dough, the familiar rooms wore that same hollowed calm, as though the walls themselves were taking a breath. I was at my desk pretending to sort the debris of the week, notes, envelopes, a carbon or two, but mostly I was keeping an ear tuned to Wolfe's quiet rustling behind me. That rustle meant he was reading, which meant he wasn't lecturing, which meant peace. Hazel Prentice sat in the red chair opposite Wolfe, her gloved hands folded like she was afraid of leaving fingerprints on the air. She looked smaller than she had during the showdown, relieved, hollow, maybe even a little dazed. Considering the week she'd had, she had plenty of right. Losing a brother, narrowly dodging a frame-up, watching a killer collapse under Wolfe's pressure, that's enough to make anyone rethink their plans for the great adventure known as New York. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "And to thank you, both of you." Wolfe inclined his head, a gesture that looked simple but cost him at least 20 calories of dignity. "You are entitled to solace, Miss Prentice. I am gratified that the truth has been established." Coming from Wolfe, that was the emotional equivalent of tossing confetti. Hazel offered him a wan smile, then turned to me. "Mr. Goodwin, Archie, I don't know how to repay any of this." "Most people start with cash," I said. "But considering the ledger situation, maybe we shouldn't lead with bookkeeping." She let out a soft, startled laugh, that quick little hitch of breath people get when they realize life hasn't stopped entirely. "I've decided to leave the city," she said. "Elias always dreamed of moving west. Not California, just somewhere quieter. I think he'd like me to go." Wolfe folded his hands on his immense stomach. "You will take with you your brother's integrity. It should serve you better than geography." I shot Wolfe a look. The man was doling out sentiments like they were rationed sugar. Hazel's eyes shimmered. She rose, smoothing her coat. "If either of you ever need anything—" "We won't," Wolfe said. Not unkindly, just factual, like reporting the time. I stepped forward, shook her hand, and walked her to the door. She paused there, her expression gathering itself like someone memorizing a room. Then she was gone, her footsteps soft on the hallway runner. I watched through the glass as she descended the stoop and set off down the street, coat pulled tight, the city already swallowing her up. When I returned to the office, Wolfe didn't look up. "A resilient woman," he said. Coming from him, that was practically a sonnet. I dropped into my chair and pulled open the drawer where I'd stashed the anonymous typed warning. The slip of paper looked no more impressive than a grocery reminder, but now that the dust had settled and the bodies buried, I had a pretty good guess whose keystrokes were behind it. The single sentence glared up at me in machine-type neatness. "If you read this, turn back now." It didn't take Wolfe's brain pan to figure it out. Elias Prentice had sent it. Probably that same night he'd realized how bad things were getting. He'd mailed it knowing he wouldn't have time for anything subtler, knowing he needed to warn someone fast, and maybe knowing that I'd be predictable enough to open it immediately. Wolfe huffed as he turned a page of the book in his hand. "You are brooding," he announced without looking, "an activity which ill suits you." "I was thinking," I said, "about this letter, about why he sent it to me, not the police." "Because he trusted your curiosity," Wolfe replied, "a trait which, though frequently exasperating, is consistent. I accounted for it." I blinked. "You accounted for it?" "Yes." He lifted the book, marked his place with a finger, and looked at me as though I'd just asked whether water is ordinarily wet. "Every competent employer must anticipate the impulses of his staff. Yours, in particular, are remarkably stable. You were bound to open the letter at once." "Well," I said, leaning back, "I must say it warms a man's heart to know he's predictable as the alphabet." "Nonsense," Wolfe said, returning to his book. "The alphabet is far less reliable." I let out a laugh. "So you admit sentiment?" "I admit accuracy," Wolfe countered. There was something softer under his tone, not warm exactly, but room-temperature courtesy, which from Wolfe is practically affection. The ledger case had poked at both of us in peculiar ways. For me, it was the second body, Gloria, staged like a bad sideshow act. For Wolfe, it was the moral arithmetic buried in those ledgers, numbers that masked fear, desperation, greed, motives written between lines instead of across them. I turned the envelope over in my hands, thumb tracing the crease. Funny, I said. The truth was hidden in ledger entries, photographs, shipping routes. But in the end, it all came down to plain old human motive. People lying, people protecting, people breaking. People, Wolfe said dryly, are perpetually inconvenient. That why you stay inside the brownstone? Partly. He eyed me over the rim of his book. And partly because I employ you to deal with the rest. Well, I said, lucky for you I have a high tolerance for humanity. That, Wolfe said, is not always a virtue. I grinned. Look who's sentimental now. He let out a majestic phooey, the kind that could have been framed and hung in the Smithsonian. The office stayed quiet for a long moment, sunlight angling low through the windows and catching the dust motes doing their afternoon ballet. It was peaceful enough that I thought maybe Wolfe would drift back into his book and I could get away with calling Lon Cohen to scold him for last week's Gazette fiasco. But then Wolfe closed the book with surprising gentleness and looked at me fully. You were nearly killed, he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even scolding, just a fact laid out like a lone domino. Sure, I said lightly. But I refrained. Thought I'd save you the trouble of hiring a new assistant. He frowned. Deep, deliberate. Do not trifle with that. I straightened. Wolfe doesn't get to the edge of protective often, but when he does, you feel it in the floorboards. That letter, he said, nodding toward the envelope in my hand, was meant for you because Elias Prentice believed you capable of acting where others might hesitate. He was correct, but it is not inevitable that you be placed in such positions. Boss, I said, I live for such positions. No, Wolfe replied, you live in defiance of them. Before I could unpack that one, a gentle throat-clearing sounded from the doorway. Fritz stood there in his immaculate whites, a silver tray held with his customary reverence. The aroma drifting in suggested dinner was imminent, 8 p.m. sharp, according to the laws of our land. Dinner is prepared, Fritz said, if you please. Wolfe inhaled like a man catching the scent of paradise. Excellent. Mr. Goodwin, finish whatever puerile musing occupies you and join me. I slipped the letter back into its envelope and tucked it into my inside pocket. It settled there with a quiet finality, the way important things do. As we reached the doorway, Wolfe paused and turned, eyebrows cresting in imperial reproach. Archie, he said, do try, if possible, to refrain from reading my private correspondence in the future. I'll do my best, I said, but curiosity is cheaper than bourbon. Your thrift, Wolfe declared, is as dangerous as your curiosity. We headed into the dining room, Fritz holding the chair for Wolfe and then for me. The table gleamed, the napkins were folded with military precision, and the scent of Fritz's masterpiece floated across the room like an overture. As I sat, the envelope pressed lightly against my chest, a tiny, stubborn reminder of how close the ledger had come to burying me along with its secrets. But that was behind us now. The truth had been tallied and paid. Wolfe had saved the police weeks of legwork. I'd saved Wolfe 6 trips out of his chair, and the world kept spinning. Not bad, I figured, for a day's work.